Hey everybody, Whitney LaBrie here, and this week we're gonna pop on over to Tiny Whitney's little kitchen and we're gonna whip up some bundt cakes. And we're gonna use polymer clay and air dry clay and see which ones we like better. I don't really think it's gonna matter what material we use. I think they're both gonna look delicious. I mean, they're gonna look delicious, but they're not gonna actually be delicious because they're not real. So just, keep that in mind. Even though you might be super tempted to eat one, even like a little nugget, don't judge. All right, so here's Tiny Whitney in her tiny kitchen showing it off for us. And it looks like she's gonna clean off the countertops for us so we have a nice clean area to bake on. And while she does that, let's go ahead and talk about the materials that we're going to need today to do these tiny little bundt cakes. So first of all, we're going to need several different colors of polymer clay for both the actual base of the cake and the berries and the icing of the cake. So we're going to have a couple different solid polymer clay, and we're also going to need some liquid polymer clay as well. And I will have all of these colors and all of these materials in the description in today's video. The other thing, of course, if you're going to be doing air dry clay instead of polymer clay, of course, you're going to need some air dry clay, and my favorite is the DOS air dry clay. Now, other materials that you're going to need for the polymer clay and also the air dry is some paper towels, some wax paper, Elmer's glue. We are going to need a razor blade, some molds. Now, if you don't have molds, you can use a bottle cap or just hand mold it. We're going to need some Velcro, the prickly side of a piece of Velcro. Other tools you're going to need are toothpicks, paintbrush, maybe a stir stick, and some dental tools like a dental pick. And then, of course, you'll need some cornstarch. Now, if you're going to be doing the air dry clay, then you're going to need some paints to color the clay once it's dried. And in this case, you're going to need some white. I'm using an oyster white. And then we have all of these other colors here that I'm using for both the cake base and also the berries. And then, of course, you'll need a paintbrush as well. And then I'll have all of these paints and the colors that I used in today's video in the description below. You will need some artist pastels. And so I'm going to list the colors that we're going to be using in the description below. To start with the cakes, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to have Tiny Whitney give me a little bit of the cornstarch and a paintbrush. Thank you. Appreciate that. And we are going to take our cornstarch and we are going to just lightly dust the inside of our little cake molds. The reason we're going to do this is because once we put in the polymer clay, this cornstarch is going to help us get that polymer clay out of these tiny little molds much easier than if we just put them in there without anything inside. All right, now to mix the polymer clay, what we're going to do is we're going to thoroughly blend 5 parts translucent with 1 part Ecru and then about a small little ball, like a pea-sized ball of cadmium yellow, or if you can't find cadmium, then you can use like a similar yellow color. And then once that's all blended, we should have a color that looks similar to this. Now, if you have a hard time blending your clay, a lot of people say that you can use a pasta machine, which is true, you can. But honestly, if you don't have one, I'm telling you right now, just wrap your polymer clay in like a plastic bag or saran wrap and go out to the garage and get a mallet or a hammer, and then you just you pound it out, honestly. You just pound it out. And I'm telling you right now that it's the cheapest, best therapy that you could possibly find. So you just pound it, open the plastic, fold it, put the plastic back on, pound it some more, and then you'll continue to do that until the polymer clay is nice and easily pliable. You can also add a little baby oil, just a tad bit, and that will also help too. All right, this is going to be enough for about 3 cakes. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to roll each little section in a ball here, and then I'm going to just push it down inside my mold, and I'm going to push it down in there really good. You're really going to use some strength and making sure that the clay takes on the full shape of the mold. In order for this to come out easier, what I did is I just pinched together these little nodules on the outside so that it'll be easier to pull out once it's ready to go. And the way that we're going to make this even easier to pull out is we are actually going to go ahead and pop these in the freezer for about 15 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, we don't want them to freeze. We just want them to get pretty hard so that they're easier to remove. And then once that is complete, once they are ready to go, you should be able to kind of wiggle them out a little bit using that little nodule that we made. And then once they pop out, check them, make sure that they look good. And then you can put it back in the mold for just a second and then grab your razor blade and then make a clean slice of that nodule and just cut that little nodule right off. And once the nodule is cut off, you can just take a little toothpick and just slightly poke inside, and then that should remove the cake. Easy peasy. Next step is to take like a dental pick, or in this case, I'm using a baking tool, and I'm just using it to remove the center pieces of my bundt cake so that it looks more like a real bundt cake. If you don't have something like this, if you don't have a tool like this, you could use a toothpick and that would do the trick. Once the center pieces are removed, you can go ahead and take your razor blade, and you can do, if you want to do this, you can, is make a sliced cake piece. And so you'll just take your razor blade and you'll just cut a little slice out. Now, this can also be done after we add color to it. It's really up to you. Some people like to do it after they do the slice. Some people like to do it before. So you just decide when you want to do the slice. Okay, now the next step is we're going to take our toothpick and we're going to create the look of sponginess, the cake sponginess on the interior part of these cakes. And the way to do that is just by taking your toothpick and just punching little tiny holes throughout the entire little spongy part of the cake. And this can be a little bit tedious if you're doing a whole bunch of cakes, but since we're just doing a few, this won't take very long. All right, and you can see there, that's the sliced part there that I added all the little holes to, and it's starting to look like real spongy cake. Now, if you're doing the air dry clay, pretty much up until this point, everything is the same. Everything is the same. You still dust your molds, you still put the clay into the freezer, and you still pop it out. I will tell you that I had a little bit of a harder time pulling it out of my mold, but what's really nice is since it's ready to go, you won't have to go through the process of blending the clay or anything like that. So it's just super easy. You take it out of the package, you roll it up, and then you just press it into your mold. Pop it in the freezer, and then once you're done, you will pull it out. The thing with the air dry clay at this point though, it's not dry. So you do have to set it aside and wait for it to completely dry. In this case, it took about really 8 full hours to dry. So I really just left it overnight. And then once you're done with all of your molding, here's your different cakes. Okay, now it's time to color and paint our cakes. So for the polymer clay, I'm going to use 2 different artist pastels. I'm going to use one color called Ochre and one color in a light to medium brown. And what you do is you just take your razor blade and you just scrape gently a little bit of the artist pastel onto, in this case, I'm just putting it right on my tile. Then I'm going to take my feathered paintbrush and I'm just going to lightly dust on top of all of my cakes the ochre color. And you don't have to put too much, and you don't have to put it on every part of the cake. Once that's complete, I'm going to take my light brown. I'm going to dust the cakes to make it look like they've been browned in different areas, you know, not perfectly browned, certainly. And then don't forget to get the bottom of your cake. If you think that the bottom of the cake might be seen, like if you're going to be using a glass plate or something like that, or a glass cake plate, and then when you're complete, they'll look something like this. And then make sure when you are adding your color, don't add it to the areas of the spongy part of the cake that we did. Make sure that those stay color free as much as possible. This is why some people like to slice the cake after they do the coloring. Again, that's up to you. Once the coloring is complete, go ahead and put those on a baking tile, and then you'll pop those in a preheated oven for 15 to 20 minutes at about 250 degrees. But please go ahead and look at your polymer clay packaging and cook it based on the packaging directions. Once it's done baking, you can go ahead and pull it out of the oven and set it aside to cool. While that cools, we're going to go ahead and take our paints and we're going to paint our air dry cakes right now. Now what I've done is I've grabbed a color called Latte, and that is going to be my base coat for all of my cakes. Then I took a color called Cocoa and I just dry brushed a little to highlight different areas. And then after I did that, I added a little milk chocolate as well. And then this is what the completed painted and colored cakes look like. Ooh la la, now it's time for the icing. In order to make the icing, what you're going to do is you're going to grab a little bit of wax paper to work on, or you could actually also use, if you don't have wax paper, just like a paper cup or kind of a throwaway container, you know, maybe some trash plastic or something like that. And you're going to take a little bit of your white polymer clay. I really like to chop it up really nice and tiny as I can, because it'll make it easier to mix. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my liquid polymer clay and I'm going to squirt in a little bit of the clay, and at this point it's kind of a hit or miss. You kind of got to practice a little bit with how much to use. So I just start off with a little bit, and then I fold my wax paper and I kind of squish it all together, and this helps that the solid polymer clay break down a little bit more. And I just keep mushing it up, and then once I mush it up quite a bit, I take a stir stick and then I just start mixing it until it becomes the actual consistency of a nice thick icing. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a toothpick and I'm going to scoop up a little bit at a time, and I'm going to start putting it on top of my little bundt cake here. And this takes a little bit of practice, so go slow. The nice thing about this is because the cake is already baked, if you get a little bit on it where you don't want it to be, you can wipe it off pretty easily and start over. So, you know, give yourself a little patience and then just go ahead and icing that cake. Once I do the cake part, I'm going to take my cake slice. I'm going to add a little dollop to that. And then for my heart-shaped cake, I'm just going to do the center of it in a little heart. Now for the air dry, I'm going to show you how to do the icing now, but just remember that because we're going to be using glue and paint, it will dry very quickly. So I don't recommend making the icing until you're ready to add the berries, so that the icing will actually be the glue that holds your berries to the cake. But for now, I'm going to show you how to make the icing. And it's super simple. All you're going to do is take some white Elmer's glue, and then you're going to add a little bit of white paint, and you're going to mix those up really nice. This is way easier than doing the polymer clay portion of this. And then you're going to go ahead and do the same method of taking your toothpick and adding the icing to the top of your cake. Now it's on to making the tiny little raspberries. So for the raspberries and polymer clay, what you're going to do is you're going to blend 3 parts translucent with 1 part of this crimson color, which is a really deep red berry color. Now I would definitely recommend not doing the berries until your cakes are made if you're going to do it at the same time, because the crimson will stain your hands, stain your fingers if you're not using gloves, and so you could easily transfer that to your cakes, so just be aware of that. So once your polymer clay is blended, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and roll this out into, a really thin little snake. I would say approximately or 1/16. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your razor blade and you're just going to slice off small tiny little bits, like 1/8 of these little bits, okay? And then you're gonna roll them up. And then what I did was I took my toothpick and I put it at the very end of the toothpick and shaped it like a little raspberry shape. And then once you have your little raspberry shape, you're gonna take your little Velcro piece, the prickly side, and you're kind of gonna roll it over those little prickles, and it's gonna make the little raspberry indentations. All right, I just made a little small bowl full here, and you can make a lot of raspberries or a little, just depending on how many you want on your cake. Now for the air dried clay, I would say that this was the most difficult part of making this cake, because the air dried clay was drying very quickly as I was rolling the little balls, and so they were kind of crumbling apart. So for the raspberries, for the air dried clay, we're just going to call them nondescript berries, because I don't really think that they look like berries at all, but I did think that they would probably be easier to make strawberries versus raspberries in this case. So for the air dried berries, of course, I had to wait for them to dry, and then what I did was I took a berry cobbler and a red rook red, and I kind of mixed them together to make the berries. And then I have a little small bowl full also. And then once all your berries are completely made, you can go ahead and start adding them to your little cakes. And then this is when your little cakes really come to life. Okay, so for the air dry clay, you're pretty much done at this point. You're just going to set your cake aside to let it completely dry, let the glue dry, the icing dry. But for the polymer clay, you're going to need to go ahead and pop those right back into the oven for another 15 to 20 minutes and let that bake. And then once that is done, now you're complete with your polymer clay berry bundt cake. I really love the way both of these different cakes turned out for different reasons. But you let me know what you think. Have you done something like this before? What were the struggles that you had or the challenges that you faced? I feel like cost-wise, I think that you could make the air dry clay for a lot less, but I think that the polymer clay does lend to a more realistic look. Time-wise, the polymer clay actually takes a lot less time because you don't have to wait for the air dry clay to, of course, air dry. But either way, I think they're both fantastic. I loved this project so much. And of course, once you do something like this, it just opens you up to wanting to do more things like this. So definitely let me know what you think. Also, FYI, I made these adorable little Valentine's Day bistro tables complete with all the accessories that you see here. You can get those on my eBay site right now. Don't miss out. They are super cute for Valentine's Day. Nothing is attached to the top, so you can actually change things up if you want and add or subtract. You know how it goes. So thank you so much for being here this week. I really appreciate you being here, and I will see you next time. Bye! Hey everybody, hope you enjoyed today's video. I'm Whitney. This is my little baking helper, Tiny Whitney, and we hope that you had fun and maybe learned something new today. If you did, go ahead and like and subscribe. It certainly helps our channel. And as always, in this crazy world, it's the little things that matter.